In a way, I became interested in, I'd say, tech more broadly as a kid. My uncle was one of these wonderkins who went to Caltech when he was too young and ended up working on the sort of DARPA internet project up at Stanford when when my mom and he were younger, and this was sort of a little bit of urban legend in my family. And so I think I always had this idea of I wanted to do something in tech or telecom or something that was sort of on the side of what was happening in the internet. I graduated from college in 97. And so it was just sort of starting. And I ended up at Morgan Stanley in their merchant banking group. And that group was doing everything, buyouts and investments in everything you could imagine, from healthcare to commodities and chemicals to things related to deregulating telecom. And so I think it was exposure there where I realized, okay, I like this investing thing, but I really like it when it has to do with markets that don't exist and people who are saying, I want to do this thing that isn't yet done. And so I constantly found myself gravitating to the venture capital side of the floor I was on at Morgan Stanley and volunteering myself for projects. And, I was reading books, electrical engineering for non-electrical engineers because I didn't study it as an undergrad. And I was fortunate enough to get to know the founder of Battery Ventures, Rick Frisbee. And, I think life is a little bit of skill and a little bit of luck. And I was just really lucky to get to know him. And he recruited me up to Battery Ventures headquarters at the time in Boston in 1999 when I was 23 years old. When I joined Battery in 99, it was, it was really the early days of sort of the modern venture capital industry. There were maybe 5 or 10 firms you were competing with to invest in companies. I went from sitting behind a desk and building Excel models and almost getting in trouble if I wanted to go out and find companies to bring into. That was my core job when I got there. I was essentially, a cold caller. And I learned a lot about, I often joke that I learned as much about sales as I did about venture capital in those early days. I think in the first year I sourced 6 companies that we ended up investing in at Battery. And so I loved it because I would stay there late at night. I'd be circling, names of CEOs and companies in magazines called Storage World and Red Herring and a bunch of magazines that don't exist anymore. And it makes me feel old to say it, but I'm not that old. And then the bubble burst. And so, I had this great fortune of working with some of the pioneers in the industry. A number of the senior partners at the time went off to start new funds like, Spark, and a number of the associates I was with at the time went off to start new funds as well, like Amplitude and Homebrew and places like that. And so I think, what ended up happening was we moved into triage mode very quickly. And so I actually was given my first 2 board seats when I was essentially a kid. I think I was 24 for one and 25 for the other. One was one was a storage company, and one was a software company doing kind of messaging routing. And one I was really well managed on. I was on the board with the head of the firm. The other one of the senior partners, who will go nameless, said, "You got me into this mess, fix it." And, fix it was like burning too much cash, didn't have what we now call product market fit. Those words didn't exist back then. And so needless to say, I had, it was a hard experience because I didn't have a lot of experience, and I needed to sort of sit and I guess have presence and do really hard things. Like I had to change the CEO at one of the companies without ever having done that before. And so I would say I had a fair amount of imposter syndrome, but I sort of did it with, I think, kindness and empathy and things of that nature. And I learned so much on the job then. And then I took a little break and went to business school, and that was supposed to be my move back west. And I rejoined Battery in their West Coast office after school. But I thought, I really thought I wanted to go onto the operating side. That was one of the reasons I went to business school, is I thought that would be a natural way for me to take a step back and, as a 26-year-old, really figure out what I wanted to do after a fairly intense few years. And I spent a little bit of time up at Microsoft for my internship, and it made me realize I loved that experience. I did some incredibly cool things that I'll get to tell my grandkids about someday. But I didn't love the size of the company. It was too big for me. It was, everybody would email each other and wait 2 weeks to get something done. And I'd pick up a phone and they'd be like, "Why are you calling me? Who uses a phone here?" So So anyway, long story short, I did end up eventually switching onto the operating side. It kind of came at a moment in time where I moved back to New York City for personal reasons, for my now husband of 14 years. But I don't know, I just had this itch to scratch. I wanted to build things, build products, understand from the inside and not the outside. And so after about 7 years on the investing side, as a junior person, I moved over and very quickly ended up in the mergers and acquisitions group of a public company called IAC. And I had spent those 7 years on sort of the bits and bytes and guts of the internet, infrastructure, storage, cybersecurity, things of that nature. And then I moved completely to the other side when I was operating and spent almost a decade on the consumer side of the business. So I worked for IAC. It was company run by Barry Diller, had just spun out Expedia and was the parent company to 100 other consumer brands, from Match to Home Shopping Network to Lending Tree to Evite, to fledgling little brands like Vimeo, which are now multi-billion-dollar companies, and Home Advisor, Angie's List. All of these, many of these companies we actually spun out while I was there. So I, at 29 or 30 years old, ended up co-heading the M&A group with a guy named Joey Levin, who now runs the company. And it was fabulous. I mean, when you go from, I think, an investment firm, and Battery is a terrific firm, but it takes time, to march yourself up to a place like IAC run by Diller. It was pretty much a meritocracy. I mean, there are all the things we look back on now that you say, well, that probably could have been a little different. But every week or two, we'd go in and we'd walk them through our ideas. We'd go to the business units. And if you did a good job for IAC and corporate, you could move into an operating role. And so I was fortunate enough to be able to do that, and ended up running a couple of the business units when we moved back to LA, when we started our family, where I'm from, and where I have a big, close, extended family. And so I ended up running City Search and Urban Spoon, and then sat on the board of IAC's mobile incubator, and I incubated one thing, and that thing turned into Tinder. So I sort of call myself the seed funder of Tinder. And I was pregnant with my third child. So not what we initially set out to fund, but ended up being probably one of the biggest value creators maybe in the history of IAC, or at least it should be probably up there. I've not done the math. And then finally, I left to start my own company. I sort of watching Tinder's growth and spending time with Sean Rad, who started the company. He'd come in every day and either try to get me to join his company, Tinder, or say, why are you doing this? Go start something. And so I actually left IAC when I was 6 months pregnant with my third child to go start my own startup. And that startup was backed by my current firm, Upfront Ventures. And so when I sold that company a little over 6 years ago, I joined Upfront as one of the GPs. I would say when I left venture, I had no intention of going back into venture, mostly because I realized I wanted to build my personal life in Southern California. And if I was going to do venture, I felt like I should do it in the Bay Area or Boston or New York. And I think the major mental shift that happened when I was an operator in LA, both at a big company, my own startup, is I just saw the tech environment growing incredibly quickly from, okay, there's 5 entrepreneurs and everybody knows who they are, to just, okay, there's 15, there's 20, there's 50, there's 100. And it went from, okay, they're all in consumer and social and local and gaming, to, oh wait, you have enterprise software companies and computer vision companies, right? And so at Upfront, for example, right as I was coming in, we were funding companies like Ring, the connected doorbell company that Amazon bought and is now their computer vision center, or Goat, the sneakerhead marketplace, which is a multi-billion-dollar company where people buy and sell sneakers, right? And so, or even companies like Appeal Sciences, which came out of UCSB and is an ag tech company that dramatically extends the shelf life of fruits and vegetables. And so those kinds of companies didn't exist 10 or 15 years ago. They were a particular version of them. And so I remember my younger sister coming to me at one point in time and saying, it would be crazy for you not to do venture capital here. Like, you loved it. This market is shifting. You were fortunate enough to get funded by Upfront, and you loved the firm and all the people there. Because at the time I was deciding, do I stay on? We had sold our company into another company, and do I stay on with that merged company? Or do I go back into venture? And I think the major mental shift for me was I got sort of the chip on my shoulder in the right place. around, okay, I'd rather build something new and different that could be, be a part of the best venture capital firm in a different way than doing kind of it exactly the same way everyone does it in Silicon Valley, and having something to prove with the community, which is very collaborative in Southern California, also appealed to me. I think there's maybe something about being a woman in Southern California where the DNA is just, it's just, we have less history in the good stuff and in the bad stuff, right? In terms of like, there're just more women in leadership roles. Anecdotally, it feels like, I think of all the boards I sit on in LA, well, it may be consistent. I was going to say, I think about 50% of the boards I sit on are led by female CEOs. And that ratio is the same in LA, but it used to be more skewed towards LA. I think the first 3 investments I made were in female CEOs based in LA. One of them is now a, let's just say a very large growth company that could go public, and things like that. And so I just think it was a different kind of inviting community with something to prove, and that also appealed to me. I think when when I was growing up, I used to always look around for role models who were exactly like me to see if my ambitions to do the thing I wanted to do existed. And now I tell people when they ask me what does it take to be in venture, I don't think there's one thing that helps you be terrific at venture. And to some extent, the people who are successful tend to be disproportionately male, disproportionately certain ethnicities. So I'll give, so I like to talk about what I think resonates for me with entrepreneurs or makes me, kind of well suited to it. But I also think that any kind of background, from journalism to equity research to starting your own companies can work. I have a particular view that operating and having run a startup in particular is probably the most helpful from an empathy standpoint. Kind of like the half-life on your operating knowledge, I think, is shorter than most venture capitalists with a lot of opinions think, whereas the half-life on empathy, I think, it goes a long way. That was one of the major things that stood out for me, with my partner Mark Suster, who was on my board. When I was having my hardest moments, he was kind, and when I was having my best moments, he was hard on me, and he kind of shifted back and forth. And I hadn't seen that level, honestly, of emotional intelligence around when and how to interact with that it's not just you as a VC coming in and how am I feeling this day. It's actually, you got to think about how is the founder feeling, because you have this impact on them that I think a lot of VCs forget. So I think that piece of it's really important. And then, I think whatever you bring to the table ends up being helpful. So it's helpful that I used to run business units, and sometimes I see things like I invest in a lot of enterprise software, a lot of cybersecurity, cloud related things, a lot of female founders. But, sometimes I'll see stuff on the enterprise software side that was an actual problem I had when I was running product and engineering teams. It's still a problem. And I'm like, oh gosh, okay, well, is it a market timing thing? Did something change in the culture, et cetera, et cetera? I think the bigger, but the big, may actually be even more helpful that I just have, I think, navigated the investment and deal side of this business as well from multiple different angles. So, I was an early investor in a company called Fleet Smith, which was bought by Apple. And, I'm not allowed to go into too much detail there because of the acquirer, but, navigating that over time, having held the hat of an M&A professional, with a lot of interest in this company from other companies, that's helpful, because that stuff, if you have great companies, they're always going to be acquirers. And how you help entrepreneurs understand everything from how to navigate corporates, how to navigate their own emotions and decide what they really want, how much of this is financially driven versus, something different. That ends up becoming important. But I think, as long as you bring your full set of skills to the table, that's meaningful. And I truly think the number one thing that makes any of us really good at venture capital is the desire to meet a lot of different companies, the access and ability to get to companies in a different way at a different time than other firms in particular areas. For us, that might be Southern California, female founders, for me, things like that. And then a consistent decision-making process is how you pick. And then, we're called upfront, but I think being upfront with founders and helping them understand where they fit, just how things are going, and giving them feedback early enough to make decisions and make them together in a positive way. And I do think you can do that with any background. It's just, we all tend to think our background makes us particularly a special flower for whatever it is we are doing. So, I'm naturally wired to catch more bees with honey and want to be an optimist, but I do think we've been set back a bit during COVID, just because in a way, one of the things that's happening is if you have a strong network, you're doing a great job of mining that network, right? It's a very transactional time. A lot of deals are now getting done. And, 9 months ago, people said, oh my goodness, am I gonna be able to invest in someone without seeing them in person? And so a lot of the women are newer in firms and funds, are female founders that maybe don't have as deep networks. And so I would say on the one hand, I'm one of the 15 women that helped start All Raise. It's a thing I care quite a bit about. I'm on the board of Time's Up. These are parts of, I think in a way, like having something to do and prove beyond just exceptional returns, which is what we all hopefully aspire to do, actually does give this job a lot more purpose and a lot more community. So All Raise has made some great progress in driving the percentage of women in firms up. Honestly, I still think we have a lot of work to do with the percentage of female founders. And I personally like to look at female CEOs. It's 2% of the industry. It hasn't moved that much. And that I think is sort of a downstream metric from getting more women in firms and then more women with power in firms. And so I'm both very optimistic because the way women are interacting, right? There are more heads of firms now, not that many, but there are more. There are more, kind of women at all portions of the ecosystem, and we're helping each other. We're doing calls, we're sharing investments, we're saying, hey, this one you should get in front of right now before they raise, or a female founder who is not a fit for me. I will, if it resonates, I will offer and try to make introductions to other people or mentor or coach younger women at other firms to help them decide, do they want to stay in or do they want to go out? I think, the coaching that we offer is often like a pat them on the back and say, yeah, it's terrible, leave. And I would say a lot of what I'm passionate about is the two-way contract between people who are slightly different to really different going into firms, the big existing firms in particular, and the people who are running those firms and have good intentions as to how do you onboard women in the right way over years, where it's, you sometimes get bad advice, right? Ask for X. And venture capital is a hard job. Like very few people are actually good at it. And so, but both sides need to kind of understand how kind of the organization and the culture may need to change a little bit, and how you kind of need to work within the system and fit in enough so that you can then start breaking the system. And the fastest way to do this is to get women in positions of power at existing firms. So a lot of what, for me, from my perspective, right, there's many different perspectives and initiatives. The thing that I've been sort of most interested in and working on at All Raise recently is spending time with the male managing partners of their firms who are doing a terrific job bringing women in, to understand the path to, like, how do you actually make that woman successful, and how do you evaluate your culture, your sourcing, your judgment, your decision making. And I sort of have a structured thing I go through with them to think about how do you make your kind of emerging women more successful. And I do that one-off, and we ran a couple sessions around it. It's different for everyone, and I was fortunate to have partners that gave me an opportunity pretty quickly. But it's not just equity and incentives and comp. It's it's actually feeling felt and feeling like you're a part of a partnership that is investing in making you successful versus telling you, constantly this may not work out, which is kind of the message that most VCs get, male and female, when they come into a firm.